Chemosh. It's one of those names the Bible vilifies from its very onset. Naturally, it would do so. As one of the pagan gods that lured Solomon off the righteous path, and one who openly received the offering of human sacrifice, you can see why Chemosh is held in such contempt. The Bible has some choice words for him. He is vile, he is detestable. He is a deity who, in spite of his relatively meagre presence in the biblical narrative, certainly leaves his mark on the ancient Israelites. Today we'll be tracking down every mention as he appears in scripture, and seeing if we can't get a complete picture of how terrible this ancient god really was. Believed to be primarily a Moabite deity, Chemosh, or Chemosh in the Greek Septuagint, appears in the Bible a total of 8 times, where, as you might imagine, he is not spoken of favourably. Whilst his origins are not spoken of in scripture, it is believed in some circles that Chemosh may have been the same as a Bronze Age deity named Chemosh, whose existence can be traced back as early as 2300 BC. However, there is little that explicitly confirms this overlap, nor a later conflation of the two. In fact, most of what we know of Chemosh stems from a Moabite stele known as the Mesha stele, dating back to the year 840 BC, that details Chemosh as belonging to the kingdom of Moab and as being quite resentful, at least during this time. In fact, according to the Mesha stele, written by 9th century BC King Mesha, Chemosh was angry with the kingdom of Moab and had thus allowed the kingdom to fall to Israel during the reign of Omri and Ahab. When Mesha ascended to the throne during the reign of Ahab, where Moab was under his control, he wrote in his inscriptions that he had rebelled against the Israelite occupation and dedicated something of a holy war against the state in tribute to Chemosh, perhaps as a means to atone for Moab's previous transgressions and return the kingdom back into the god's good graces. When Mesha did capture the Gadite city of Ataroth, he slaughtered all of its people in tribute to Chemosh, and then sacrificed the warden of the city, the Gadite chief Uriel, as well. After this, he conquered the town of Nebo and sacrificed the entire Israelite population who were living there to Chemosh too. What's more, he also stole all the lambs at the sanctuary of Yahweh and brought them to the sanctuary of Chemosh, which had been set up in Nebo when it had fallen into his hands. There, the sheep were also sacrificed to Chemosh, which was believed to mark the point where Chemosh forgave the Moabite kingdom and brought them success. Mesha later noted that he erected a high place to Chemosh in the citadel of the Moabite capital of Debon, as gratitude for Chemosh for supporting his military endeavour against the Israelite invaders. We can gather from the Mesha stele what the worship of Chemosh might have looked like, and perhaps why the Bible was so adamantly against the deity, he who willingly accepted both animal and human sacrifice as a means of appeasement. According to Orientalist Edward Lipinski, in his work On the Skirts of Canaan in the Iron Age, the Moabites considered human sacrifice necessary in order to earn Chemosh's favour, especially in times of strife or political uncertainty. Such worship is echoed by those in the Phoenician colony of Carthage, where, as reported by the likes of historian Diodorus Siculus, the Phoenicians would sacrifice children during periods of war, famine, or other statewide emergencies to gain the favour of the deity Baal Hamon. As per the Mesha stele, those in political power, especially the king, might have sacrificed a leader of an opposing nation to Chemosh as a gesture of thanks for granting him such glory and success. In another view, this human sacrifice was also a part of the conditions which the king would have wordlessly agreed with the deity. In short, Chemosh would grant the king victory, and in return, the king would grant Chemosh a human soul. Of course, in the instance of Mesha, he goes the extra mile in thanking Chemosh by sacrificing an entire Israelite population in the town of Nebo, which some might consider also customary in the worship of Chemosh, that conquered people were not to be imprisoned, enslaved, or sold, but rather given to Chemosh as form of payment. Interestingly, the Hebrew Bible actually claims that Mesha would sacrifice his own son to Chemosh in exchange for success in the military campaign against Israel, though it should be noted that the stele makes no reference of this transpiring. Naturally, animal sacrifice was also a part of Chemosh worship, which we can gather from the stele. The lambs that Mesha inherits when he conquers Nebo are not seen as his to keep, but rather possessions that had not only once belonged to Yahweh, but for that fact, needed to be given unto Chemosh to enjoy instead. Like with any god worshipped in the Canaanite regions, sanctuaries were built to honour them. Chemosh then, going by the Mesha stele, was no different, for once more, high places were shown to be built at the Moabite capital of Daban, again almost as a form of gratitude for the Moabite success in the conflict against Israel. Now, having had a first-hand account from Mesha about Chemosh, who naturally paints the deity as all-powerful, or at least powerful enough to crush the Israelites without Yahweh's intervention, you won't be surprised to learn that the Bible paints Chemosh in a much more despicable light. Numbers 21 contains the first reference of Chemosh, where the Israelites, having left Egypt, are still wandering the desert. Here they come upon the territory of Sihon, the king of the Amorites, and hope to receive safe passage, promising not to touch any fields or wells as they pass. However, Sihon refuses and instead marches out to meet the Israelites in battle, where he is defeated at Jahaz. The Israelites then captured his territory from the Arnon River up to the Jabbok, stopping only at an Ammonite stronghold that they were ill-equipped to take. It is here that the narrative comes to a pause, and the Bible quotes what it identifies as the poets, or those who speak in proverbs. These poets are not identified, but appear to be a collection of cultural memories of the ancient Near East, whose verses celebrate victories, mock enemies, and record the shifting power between various nations. In this instance, it appears to be an Amorite victory song, celebrating how Sihon had earlier defeated Moab and taken cities like Heshbon from its kingdom. Here then, Chemosh is portrayed not only as a god of the Moabites, but also as a loser god, a god of a people who, before the Israelites had even ventured into the land, had already been defeated once by Sihon and the Amorites, a people the Bible would justify as being weaker than the wandering Israelites. That is why the poets say, "Come to Heshbon, and let it be rebuilt. Let Sion's city be restored. Fire went out from Heshbon, a blaze from the city of Sion. It consumed Ar of Moab, the citizens of Arnon's heights. Woe to you, Moab! You are destroyed, people of Chemosh. He has given up his sons and fugitives, and his daughters as captives, to Sihon, king of the Amorites." This then implies that of all the Canaanite gods that could have enticed the Israelites, Chemosh would not be one of them, for his people had already been destroyed long before the Israelites had even come to roam the desert. What must be remembered here though is that this was not the sentiments of the authors of the Bible, nor of the Israelites, but rather the earlier sentiments of the Amorites, who had conquered the Moabites. Indeed, they might have eliminated the Moabite presence in this territory of Sihon, and even crushed the influence of Chemosh here, but the Israelites certainly did not, which is perhaps why the deity comes to haunt them later on. The next mention of Chemosh comes in Judges 11, where Jephthah, a man who becomes head of Israel, attempts to peacefully negotiate terms with the king of the Ammonites, who claims that the Israelites stole their land when they came out of Egypt. Here Jephthah responds with a long, detailed retelling of Israel's history, arguing that whilst Israel took land from Sihon and the Amorites, they had not taken anything from the Ammonites. He argues, "Then the Lord, the God of Israel, gave Sihon and his whole army into Israel's hands, and they defeated them. Israel took over all the land of the Amorites who lived in that country, capturing all of it from the Arnon to the Jabbok, and from the desert to the Jordan. It should be noted here that some 300 years had passed since the time of Israel defeating Sihon, and so when Jephthah gives this recount, he really means to give an honest account of what had transpired and who exactly the Israelites had stolen the land from. He then adds almost confrontationally, "Now since the Lord, the God of Israel, has driven the Amorites out before his people, Israel, what right have you to take it over? Will you not take what your god Chemosh gives you? Likewise, whatever the Lord our God has given us, we will possess." Whilst we know that Chemosh was the god of the Moabites, we don't know if he was the god of the Ammonites too. Jephthah mentioning Chemosh here might have been a sign of his ignorance of the other gods, or perhaps about as much as he knew about the foreign cultures, given that he was living on the fringes of society after being exiled himself. However, it might also be a sign of how the Canaanite nations recognized the gods of their pantheon as sharing the same realm, and thus, when Jephthah said Chemosh, the king of the Ammonites would have known he was referring to their god. Again, some 300 years had transpired since the time that Sihon's land was taken from him. Therefore, in this verse, it sort of comes across as a challenge from Jephthah that if the Ammonite god, Chemosh or otherwise, wanted to do something about it, he'd had a pretty long time to do so. In other words, the land couldn't have been theirs, or their god, again, Chemosh or otherwise, would have made an attempt by now to try and take it back. With the line, "Will you not take what Chemosh gives you?" Jephthah implies that since their god in Yahweh had given them the Amorite land, they had no choice but to possess it, much as the Ammonites would possess the land which Chemosh had given to them. In other words, if Chemosh was greater than Yahweh, then he'd have ripped the lands from their hands and given it to them. However, since he hadn't, this was then proof enough that the disputed land was Israel's for the keeping. Others might see Jephthah's response here as fighting words, whereby it might be read along the lines of, "If your God is mighty enough to fight our God and take the land, then let him do it. Let's see who's stronger, Yahweh or Chemosh." With this interpretation, it should come as no surprise then that the two sides go to war, with Jephthah delivering Israel and conquering the Ammonites too, thus proving in an indirect way once again that Chemosh was no match for Yahweh, and thus, once again, was a god on the losing side, even though this may not strictly have been politically correct if Jephthah's assumption about Chemosh being their patron god wasn't true. The next two mentions of Chemosh are found within 1 Kings chapter 11, where we see the downfall of one of Israel's most beloved kings. Solomon, who once asked God for wisdom above all else, is shown to turn his heart in another direction, to the women of his many foreign marriages. He takes wives from the nations like Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and the Hittites, relationships that were explicitly warned against because they would lead Israel into idolatry. In his old age, Solomon follows after other gods, including Ashtoreth of the Sidonians, Molech of the Ammonites, and Chemosh of the Moabites, even building high places for them on the hills east of Jerusalem. This serves to be a complete reversal of his earlier role as the builder of the temple. He who once centralized worship of the Lord now multiplies altars to foreign gods. We are told, "On a hill east of Jerusalem, Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, and for Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. He did the same for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and offered sacrifices to their gods." You'll notice that both Moloch and Chemosh are described as detestable, and whilst the Bible doesn't elaborate on this adjective, we can infer that if both are described in the same way, both may have shared similar characteristics. Considering what we know of Molech, with his associations with child sacrifice, and considering what we know of Chemosh from the mesh of steel in terms of human sacrifice, You might say that it was this form of worship that the Bible vilified here, and why the authors spoke so lowly of these deities. The second mention of Chemosh comes later in this chapter, where we see Ahijah, the prophet of Shiloh, explain to Jeroboam that the Lord will tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hands and split it into 10 tribes because they had forsaken and worshipped other gods. We are told, "I will do this because they have forsaken me and worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh, the god of the Moabites, and Molech, the god of the Ammonites, and have not walked in obedience to me, nor done what is right in my eyes, nor kept my decrees and laws, as David, Solomon's father, did." Evidently, in spite of the Amorites' victory poem over the Moabites and Chemosh, who it was made to seem was defunct back in Numbers 21, Chemosh by this point is again a very real threat, at least for the Israelites. He has not only enticed the common Israelite into worshipping him, but convinced even the king, one who was even known for his great heritage, wisdom, and blessings, into worshipping him. By corrupting Solomon, albeit through the influence of his wives, Chemosh and the other pagan gods proved themselves to be potent deities capable of corrupting even the best of God's chosen people, which creates the reality that no one was really safe from their clutches. The next mention of Chemosh is in 2 Kings 23, where we see Josiah's reforms come into effect, which sees him tearing down generations of idolatry in an attempt to realign Judah with the covenant. The chapter opens with Josiah gathering all the people, along with the priests and the prophets, and reading the law publicly, renewing the covenant before them, and ensuring their recommitment to Yahweh. What follows then is a systematic purge of the pagan deities, with Josiah ordering the removal and destruction of all objects associated with foreign worship. This includes items dedicated to the likes of Baal and Asherah, where they are burned outside Jerusalem and their ashes scattered. He deposes the idolatrous priests who had been appointed by previous kings, shuts down the high places where illicit worship took place, and even breaks down the houses of male cult prostitutes that had existed within the temple precincts. Naturally, if the likes of Baal was being evicted and banished under Josiah's reign, Baal being a prominent deity that had significant sway over the Israelites, you can be sure that worship of Chemosh was eradicated too. We are told, "He pulled down the altars the kings of Judah had erected on the roof near the upper room of Ahaz, and the altars Manasseh had built in the 2 courts of the temple of the Lord. He removed them from there, smashed them to pieces, and threw the rubble into the Kidron Valley. The king also desecrated the high places that were east of Jerusalem, on the south of the hill of corruption, the one Solomon, king of Israel, had built for Ashtoreth, the vile goddess of the Sidonians, for Chemosh, the vile god of Moab, and for Molech, the detestable god of the people of Ammon. Josiah smashed the sacred stones and cut down the Asherah poles, and covered the sites with human bones." Now, you'd think that given the thoroughness of Josiah in this purge of the old gods, that Chemosh would never ever show his face again. But of course, considering the narrative in the Bible that frames each subsequent generation of Israel repeating the sins of those that came before them, Chemosh does indeed reappear for the last time by the time of Jeremiah. Chapter 49 of Jeremiah tells us of the long sweeping judgment of the land of Moab, as delivered by Jeremiah himself. The chapter opens with the announcement that Moab cities, places like Nebo, Kiriathaim, and Heshbon, are laid to waste, their strongholds broken, their people humiliated, and left to flee in panic. There is a constant sense of chaos throughout the passage. Cries, alarms, the sound of destruction spreading from one city to another, as if the whole land is unraveling at once. The account paints quite the vivid image of what transpired, telling us, "Woe to Nebo, for it will be ruined. Kiriathaim will be disgraced and captured. The stronghold will be disgraced and shattered. Moab will be praised no more. In Heshbon, people will plot her downfall. Come, let us put an end to that nation. You, the people of madmen, will also be silenced. The sword will pursue you. Cries of anguish arise from Horonaim. Cries of havoc and destruction. Moab will be broken. Her little ones will cry out. Of course, if we're discussing the destruction of Moab, specifically the city of Nebo, then surely, as per the mesh of steel and as per Jephthah's message to the Ammonite king, Chemosh would have something to say about it. We touched upon it earlier that Jephthah's response to the Ammonite king hinted at a fight between Yahweh and Chemosh, and that if the likes of Chemosh wanted to try his luck, then Yahweh would be there to meet him and defeat him. Now in Jeremiah, it appears that this foreshadowing is realized, and whilst it's not the Israelites doing the butchering, but rather the Babylonians under King Nebuchadnezzar II, it is believed that this is attributed to Yahweh. Yahweh signed off on the destruction of Moab and Chemosh could do nothing about it. Jeremiah continues, "Flee, run for your lives, become like a bush in the desert. Since you trust in your deeds and riches, you too will be taken captive, and Chemosh will go into exile, together with his priests and officials. The destroyer will come against every town, and not a town will escape." Jeremiah's description goes on to tell us that Moab had lived rather well in the desert, and that because of its military might and its economic fortune, it had never really tasted defeat, and it had never known strife. Its aroma remained unchanged, Jeremiah specifies, but that was all about to change when men, arguably the Babylonians, were sent by God to run amok of the land and reduce it to chaos. Here we are told, "Then Moab will be ashamed of Chemosh, as Israel was ashamed when they trusted in Bethel." Here we understand that Yahweh will make the invasion of Moab so terrible for the Moabites that they will be ashamed of Chemosh, who evidently will do nothing to protect or save them. Indeed, they will wonder why they had ever trusted in him, and express displeasure over his cowardice and inactivity, as they are purged by the Babylonians on behalf of Yahweh, the superior deity. What's more, God notes that it will be just as Israel was ashamed when they trusted in Bethel, an occurrence that took place during the times of Jeroboam, where Jeroboam established Bethel as one of his main religious centers to prevent people from going to Jerusalem. It was here that the golden calf was set up, effectively turning Bethel into a state-sponsored alternative to proper worship. Considering the political instability that plagued Jeroboam's rule and the carnage that followed afterwards, the Israelites certainly regretted trusting in Bethel, just as the Moabites, at this point in their history, would come to regret trusting Chemosh. The final mention of Chemosh occurs at the end of this chapter, and comes across as the final nail in the coffin of this pagan deity. We are told, "Woe to you, Moab! The people of Chemosh are destroyed. Your sons are taken into exile, and your daughters into captivity." With these mentions in mind, Chemosh comes across not only as a disgraced deity who could not protect his people, but also a doomed deity that subsequently vanishes from scripture. This is significant because, unlike the likes of Baal, who routinely returned to corrupt the Israelites throughout the entirety of the Old Testament, there is much more of a finality applied to Chemosh. As per the final lines of Jeremiah 48, his people are destroyed, his sons are taken into exile, his daughters are made captive, and he is incapable of saving them. This then does not sound like much of a god. At best, it sounds perhaps more like a failed god, who whilst once believed himself to be powerful, did not know true power until he felt the wrath of one such as Yahweh. Without any sons, daughters, or people left to worship him, you might say Chemosh loses his god status and fades into the realm of irrelevancy, both his reputation and his potency now void. As always guys, if you've enjoyed today's episode, then don't forget to leave this video a like and subscribe for more content just like this. Until next time.